people who are normally at work but on reserve duty are now fighting. They've been mobilized. And so even the workforce has shifted to war. So the costs are enormous. Of course, the United States puts in billions and billions and billions of dollars. And that's what Netanyahu counts on. He counts on the U.S. military and he counts on the U.S. taxpayer. But what he doesn't understand, in my opinion, is that Americans do not like Israel's behavior in this. They do not like what is mass murder in Gaza, a place that has just been leveled to ruins, to smithereens, where 2 million people used to live. Who's going to pay for that recovery? Well, is it going to be the U.S. taxpayer again? Young people in the United States show up, especially in the polls, as saying, we completely reject that. But Netanyahu is counting on the fact that he can entice, if that's the right word, or drag or pull or yank the U.S. into a regional war with Iran right now, and billions or tens of billions of dollars more to finance Israel through all of this. I doubt that his calculation is right. And I have to say, it may sound wrong to say, what do I know that he doesn't know? But he was the one that said to the U.S. in 2002, oh, go in, invade Iraq. It'll be great. It'll be great, he told us. And it's going to change the whole face of the Middle East in a great way. So if you go back to what this guy has been saying for decades, it's a lot of garbage.
What Jeffrey Sachs points out here is not just the military and economic burdens that Israel's war is placing on its own society, but also the strain it's putting on the U.S. public and political system. Netanyahu's reliance on U.S. support, both financial and military, is clear. But Sachs believes Netanyahu's strategy may be running on borrowed time. Let's delve deeper into this. The mobilization Sachs refers to is happening on a massive scale. People who were once contributing to the economy, working jobs, supporting businesses, keeping the country running, are now on the front lines. In the short term, this has massive economic implications. Businesses stall, industries suffer, and the country's productivity drops as resources shift towards war. The costs aren't just local. Israel relies heavily on U.S. financial aid to sustain these efforts. Year after year, the U.S. has poured billions into Israel's military, providing advanced weaponry and financial backing for their operations. But as Sachs points out, the long-term impact on the U.S. taxpayer is becoming an increasing concern, especially for younger generations. This brings up a critical question. How much longer will the U.S. public be willing to shoulder these costs, particularly for a conflict that many Americans feel uneasy about? Public opinion in the U.S. has undergone a significant shift, especially among young people. While previous generations may have been more steadfast in their support for Israel, today's younger Americans are questioning the ethics of continued U.S. involvement. They see the devastation in Gaza, with entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble, and question whether American financial support should continue. Polling data shows that younger voters, particularly millennials and Gen Z, are far less supportive of Israeli military actions. They are more vocal about human rights, more attuned to global justice issues, and more likely to oppose U.S. military aid to Israel if it leads to further destruction and loss of life in Gaza. Sachs touches on this when he mentions young Americans showing up in the polls, rejecting the narrative that the U.S. should unconditionally back Israel in its military ventures. For Netanyahu, this could become a serious issue. He's banking on continued U.S. support, but this growing divide in public opinion could undermine that support in the near future. Sachs makes a bold statement. Netanyahu may be overestimating how much the U.S. is willing to give. The Israeli prime minister is not just counting on American dollars. He's banking on the U.S. being pulled into a broader regional conflict with Iran. Netanyahu seems to believe that if Israel escalates tensions enough, the U.S. will have no choice but to get involved. But Sachs suggests that this is where Netanyahu's strategy could backfire. Think back to 2002, when Netanyahu encouraged the U.S. to invade Iraq, promising that it would reshape the Middle East for the better. Of course, we know now that this couldn't have been further from the truth. The Iraq War led to years of instability, immense human suffering, and a long-term drain on U.S. resources. Now, Netanyahu is playing a similar game, but this time with Iran. He seems convinced that if Israel can provoke Iran enough, the U.S. will have to intervene, just as it did in Iraq. But Sachs warns that this could lead to yet another disastrous Middle East conflict, one that the U.S. may not be willing or able to afford. The comparison Sachs makes between Netanyahu's current strategy and the Iraq War is particularly striking. In 2002, Netanyahu was one of the loudest voices pushing for the U.S. to invade Iraq. He claimed that toppling Saddam Hussein would lead to a more peaceful and stable Middle East. But the reality was far different. The invasion unleashed chaos, with sectarian violence, insurgency, and long-term instability becoming the new norm. The war took a massive toll on U.S. soldiers, Iraqi civilians, and the U.S. economy. And it also undermined U.S. credibility on the world stage. Sachs is warning that Netanyahu may be leading the U.S. down a similar path this time, with Iran in the crosshairs. If the U.S. allows itself to be dragged into a war with Iran, the consequences could be even more devastating than Iraq. Iran is a far more formidable opponent, with a larger population, a stronger military, and regional alliances that could complicate any conflict. Beyond the financial costs, Sachs also touches on the human toll of this conflict. Gaza has been turned into a war zone, with civilians bearing the brunt of the violence. Entire communities have been destroyed, and the death toll continues to rise. The question Sachs asks is simple: who will pay for the reconstruction? Netanyahu seems to be relying on the U.S. to once again pick up the bill. But as Sachs points out, there is growing resistance to this idea. American taxpayers are already weary of financing endless wars in the Middle East. Many are questioning why the U.S. should bear the financial burden of rebuilding Gaza when it was Israel's military actions that caused the destruction in the first place. And it's not just the financial cost. There is also the moral cost, the question of whether the U.S. should continue to support a government that many Americans feel is committing atrocities against civilians. In the final minutes of Sachs' speech, he hints at a broader shift in U.S. politics. As young voters continue to reject U.S. involvement in Israel's military actions, there is a growing possibility that future U.S. administrations may take a different approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This could mean a reduction in military aid, increased pressure on Israel to reach a diplomatic solution, or even a rethinking of the U.S.-Israel alliance altogether. Sachs suggests that Netanyahu may not fully grasp the depth of this shift in American politics, but it is happening, and it could have serious consequences for Israel. The days of unconditional U.S. support for Israel may be numbered, and if Netanyahu continues to push the U.S. into a broader conflict with Iran, he could find himself without the backing he has come to rely on. Jeffrey Sachs raises critical questions about the future of U.S.-Israel relations. Netanyahu's strategy relies on U.S. support, both financially and militarily, but Sachs warns that this support may not be as solid as Netanyahu believes. With public opinion in the U.S. shifting, especially among younger generations, there is growing opposition to continued U.S. involvement in Israel's military campaigns. At the same time, Sachs draws a clear parallel between Netanyahu's push for a conflict with Iran and his disastrous support for the U.S. invasion of Iraq. If the U.S. allows itself to be pulled into another Middle East war, the consequences could be catastrophic for both Israel and the U.S. The question now is whether the U.S. will continue to follow Netanyahu's lead, or whether a new generation of American voters will demand a different path. According to Jeffrey Sachs, people who are normally at work but on reserve duty are now fighting. They've been mobilized, and so even the workforce has shifted to war. The costs are enormous. Of course, the United States puts in billions and billions of dollars, and that's what Netanyahu counts on. He counts on the U.S. military and the U.S. taxpayer. But what he doesn't understand, in my opinion, is that Americans do not like Israel's behavior in this. They do not like what is mass murder in Gaza, a place that has been leveled to ruins, where 2 million people used to live. Who's going to pay for that recovery? Is it going to be the U.S. taxpayer again? Young people in the U.S., especially those showing up in the polls, are saying they completely reject that. But Netanyahu is counting on the fact that he can yank the U.S. into a regional war with Iran right now and demand billions, or tens of billions, more to finance Israel through all of this. I doubt his calculation is right. Remember, in 2002, he told the US, "Go invade Iraq, it'll be great." And we know how that turned out. Thanks for watching.